I've had this video in the works for a while now, but it's such a convoluted story and I want to make sure that I fit in as many snide remarks as possible. I just have to make sure I get all of those in. Hello everybody and welcome back to another Storytime video. This is the story of my worst relationship ever that ended in the worst possible way. I don't know, maybe there are worse ways, but this is definitely like top 5 worst ways a relationship can end. And my intention was always to tell this story from the start of my YouTube channel. I knew I was going to tell it, but I want to tell it right. And so after years of waiting for the right time to be ready, to have all of my snide comments cataloged and placed into the right areas of the story, I've realized that that's not gonna happen. And I don't know, something about getting married, I was just like, let's just unpack this already, and then I can just literally stop thinking about it. So this relationship started when I was 18. I had moved back to New Zealand. I was in culinary school in New Zealand, obviously. I started working at restaurants in Wellington, New Zealand, and I was just desperately trying to cover up any and all emotions I was having about my past and growing up and all of the hurt and betrayal and grief and anger that I had about that. I just wanted to ignore it. I literally wanted to wipe my slate clean and just become a completely different person who was not affected by all of this emotional baggage. And in trying to repress so many emotions, I turned to what most people turn to: partying and drinking and drugs and smoking and alcohol, men and self-harm, and whatever else I could get my hands on to just make myself as numb as possible. I felt so unstable at this time in my life, and I was young and hurting, and I think I did what so many young, hurting people do, which is turning to self-destruction to try to manifest the internal pain externally and to try to prove, especially to the people who had hurt me, how badly it had hurt. And the self-destruction, it never goes well. But anyway, I was 18 and I met this guy who I worked with, and I was so desperate for someone to love me and for someone to accept me and for someone to validate my worth as a human being, and he became that person. When we met, I was like a hardcore carnivore, a chef, a foodie. He was too. Our lives were just about gourmet food and drinking ourselves into an oblivion almost every night. And it was soon after we started having a relationship that I really felt like I had become dependent on him. Like, it was very codependent, but it was almost like any other addiction, with the alcohol, with the cigarettes, with cutting myself, self-harm. I was actually able to replace a lot of those behaviors with just being with him. And I remember feeling so desperate for him. You know, it was like agony waiting for him to come show up at my apartment. I was always petrified that he was just going to disappear or leave me or decide that he didn't want to be with me, and I was going to be just totally left alone and have nothing to turn to except the alcohol and the drugs and the cigarettes and all the other stuff that I really didn't want to be part of my life, but I didn't know any other way to live. And so it was not a healthy start to a relationship, although I was pretending as best I could that I was like a normal person who could function. But I was getting sicker. I had been diagnosed with hypothyroid, and at this point I was trying to deal with it with the naturopathy and all of the herbs and the supplements, and still drinking myself into an oblivion. But the longer that I was in a relationship with this guy, the more comfortable I got with our relationship, the more I kind of trusted that he wasn't going to disappear. And once I had that stability, I started deciding that I want to take better care of myself. I stopped going out as much, I stopped drinking as much, I started going to the health food store and, buying organic kale. I just really started allowing my my love for health and wellness through nutrition, which had started to blossom when I was a teenager and had been squashed, to kind of start to bloom again. And it was through this stability and this love that I felt with this guy that was able to happen. So it was around this time when I was starting to take better care of myself that I decided I wanted to do a yoga teacher training. And one of the best yoga teacher trainings that I could find was at the Mount Madonna Institute, just around Santa Cruz, California. And they had a 30-day live-in yoga teacher training intensive. And I decided I wanted to do that. So I signed up for it. And since my boyfriend and I were planning a 3-month-long trip through the US, I decided to just do the yoga teacher training the month before, and then I would be apart from my boyfriend for about a month. We had been together for about 9 months at this point, so I felt like that was something that we could do, and I was like head over heels in love with him. I thought that he was my soulmate, the love of my life. I think we were both kind of thinking that, this is gonna be forever, and I remember him saying something like, I'm gonna marry you one day. But I can look back, and even though I was like totally head over heels in love, I can definitely see red flags. There would be times where like I would say something or do something and he would just become like indignant about it. And instead of telling me, he would just do something like completely walk away or just ignore me. And because I was so codependent, that ignoring was just unbearable for me. And I remember feeling like a big part of me was really unacceptable to him. I just thought that I could pretend to be someone who was acceptable to him for the rest of my life, and maybe one day it would just feel natural. So I left for my yoga teacher training, head over heels in love, and yoga teacher training changed everything. In the 30 days that I was there, I became myself. I met for the first time in my life human beings who were open and kind and thoughtful and reflective, people who were just sweet. And there were at least 60 people in my program, and I remember falling in love with like each and every one of them because they were so lovely. And I know that retreats do this to people, but it was the first time in my life that I started to reflect on the behavior that I grew up with and realized that it was really sick. It was the first time in my life that I was able to start acknowledging some of that pain and trauma and disappointment and shame that I had in myself for my own behavior and start to process it and understand why. Before then, I believed that I was a monstrous person. That's what my mom told me. I believed that I was a monstrous person who purposefully or accidentally hurt the people that loved me. I thought that it was unsafe for people to love me, and I thought that for the rest of my life I would have to hide who I was because I was a monster, an uncontrollable monster. But I started to face that while I was there. I remember having, one of the most intense breakdowns of my life, and I remember my roommate there, she just like cradled me in her arms like I was a little baby, and I cried for so long. And God, I'm gonna get emotional just because of her kindness and how much that meant to the course of my life. It was just her simply and compassionately being there without judgment, and it changed my life. It changed the way I felt about myself. And obviously around the same time I was learning all of this stuff about yoga and energy and this whole spiritual realm that I had never really been introduced to, as grew up in an atheist house. And I was so intrigued and excited and just full of all of the possibilities of it. And I just assumed while I was there, as I was changing so radically without even noticing, I just assumed that, my partner, my love, would come along for the ride and be just as excited as I was about these amazing life-changing revelations. I expected him to be just as emotionally available as these 60+ people that I was sharing everything with. And I was so excited to see him. Like, I was counting down the seconds until I got to see him again because I just thought that our life was going to be amazing together. Also at yoga teacher training, one of the people that I met was this man. He was a few years older than me. I think I just turned 19 at this point. And he was like this vegetarian yogi. And he was, in my opinion, like he was everything a man should be. He was kind and thoughtful and compassionate and masculine and sexy as hell, in my opinion. But we were also in relationships. And so I fell in love with him, like head over heels, stupid in love with this guy. We never did anything. And I think that that is my favorite part of our relationship, is that we never broke the promises that we had made to other people. And so we never breached our own integrity. Yet I loved him. I'm still not sure really how he felt about me. That's not something that was ever explored. But he was so kind and so respectful and just so sweet to me. And he seemed to want to be around me, not because he just wanted to have sex with me, but I don't know, because he actually liked who I was. I felt seen and I felt accepted by him, and that was something that I had never felt before. Anyway, these 30 days of my life were probably some of the biggest days of my life. After the teacher training, I went into San Francisco with my roommate from Mount Madonna. I went to go pick up my boyfriend from the airport, still so excited and so trusting that this person was going to be everything to me and with me. And I remember so vividly, I was standing there and I was just open from these 30 beautiful days of transforming who I was, and I saw him walk through the arrivals gate, and my heart, my stomach sank. It just plummeted, and I knew right then I didn't want to be with this person. And I remember being so shocked and horrified by that feeling and that very clear thought. And yet we had a 3-month trip planned together, and I had my return ticket to New Zealand planned, and we had things planned out for our future, but I didn't want any of it. And I look back on that moment in my life and I wish to God that I had had the boundaries and the gumption and the capacity to have said to him right then, I don't want to do this, and been brave enough to speak what was in my heart, and had been brave enough to face my future without him. But for whatever reasons, I wasn't. Even though I had transformed so much, even though I felt like I was getting to a good place, I had no trust in myself that if I was out of this relationship with this guy who had provided me with so much stability, I didn't think that I would be able to maintain that stability with just me. I thought that I would backslide into the alcoholic, addict, complete mess of a human being that I had been when we met. And I was scared of that more than anything. So I tried to pull it together and kind of like fake it, and I tried to breach some of these subjects about yoga teacher training with him, and I tried to talk to him about some of the pain and the trauma that I had felt, and to be perfectly honest, it was like trying to talk to a freaking brick wall. There was just nothing, no reflection, no conversation, no interest, and I felt so alone, which was terrible after I knew that people who were open existed. And to be honest, I got kind of depressed and despondent after that. Our whole 3-month trip was just kind of like, I felt the whole time that I didn't want to be doing it, that I didn't want to be there, that I didn't care about the food, I didn't care about the sights that we were trying to see. And to be perfectly honest, he didn't seem to care either, and it somehow became my entire responsibility to plan the whole trip. And I would always ask him, like, okay, well, where do you want to go, and what do you want to see, and what's important to you? And, oh, I don't know, whatever, nothing. But I thought, maybe things will change when we get back to New Zealand and I can find some friends who I get along with. So we went back to New Zealand. When we got back, I decided that I didn't want to work in restaurants anymore because I had been experimenting with vegetarianism, as was introduced to me at yoga teacher training. And I didn't want to touch the meat, and I didn't want to be in kitchens. It's such a toxic environment, both physically but mostly emotionally. It's just horribly abusive places to be. I didn't want to do that anymore, so I got a job at an organic shop, and I stayed in this relationship with this guy for months and months, and I was depressed and unsatisfied, and I know he picked up on that. I know I tried to express it to him several times. I remember saying so many times, I don't know how to say this to you because you just don't get it. I don't know how to explain how I'm feeling because you seem to have none other than like, okay, hungry, and pissed off. And I didn't want to be with him. I wanted to be with somebody else. I wanted to explore life alone, but I was so scared. I was so freaking scared that I would become a mess as soon as I left him. And I was so scared that I would lose the validation that he gave me of, I'm a worthwhile human being. I'm worth being in a relationship with. I am lovable. And I know that a big part of me being with him was proof to my mother that yes, someone could love me and I was lovable and I was capable of holding a relationship together, because she always said that I wasn't. So as time went by, I kind of stayed on my path. I kept exploring spirituality. I kept cleaning up my diet. I was having some health issues just because I was eating so much fat and plenty of cheese and trying to avoid carbohydrates, and it was just a mess. But I started getting interested in vegan diets and raw vegan diets and was experimenting with those. It was a tough couple of months. And to be perfectly honest, I'm kind of surprised that my boyfriend stayed on board for all of that. And for me, I kept being like, why don't you leave me? Like, you clearly don't like me. Why don't you go? Ask myself the same question, right? And he kept doing the chef thing. And I think he was purposely kind of making himself more and more busy because he started racing motorcycles. I went to one of his races and I sat there the whole time and I actually wrote him a breakup letter while I was sitting there watching him race. Like, this is just ridiculous. We have nothing in common. I can't believe I'm here. No. Never gave it to him because I was too much of a wuss. I just didn't want to be with him. But it was comfortable. It was comfortable and kind of reliable, and I knew I had someone to snuggle me at night, and I knew I had someone to look forward to, so I didn't leave. And I always got kind of confused because he did seem so happy when he was with me. He seemed to really love me and enjoy me and enjoy the things that I wanted to do in some ways. But then when he was with other people, I noticed that he was a very different person, and it was almost as if his entire personality changed to adopt the person that he was standing next to. And when he was with me, he would always complain about his friends or his coworkers, but then he would go and hang out with them, and I was always so confused. Like, if you don't like them, why are you spending time with them? There was this one coworker who worked in a restaurant with him, and this guy was just like a disgusting degenerate of a human being. They seemed to be attracted to restaurant and hospitality work, but I remember just, like, I was disgusted by him, by the way that he treated his girlfriend. It was disgusting. It was like she was just this sexual plaything that was there for his amusement, and he would do whatever he wanted to with her body and then brag about it to everyone. He was also really into drugs and a lot of drinking and partying, and he kept trying to bait my boyfriend into like having a foursome with them, and I was obviously not having any of that. And so he kept trying to bait him into having a threesome with him and his girlfriends, and the whole thing was just disgusting. And I was like, why are you hanging out with this person? And then New Year's Eve 2010 came around, and I had decided to become raw vegan at this point. It was high fruit, raw vegan, very bizarre to everyone around me, but I was thriving. This was the best I'd ever felt. And I was not drinking, totally sober, no drugs, no cigarettes. I was really proud of myself. I was really feeling good. And my boss invited me to have dinner at her place, and I loved my boss at this point. Like, I still love her. And I went to dinner at her house, and my boyfriend went to a party at his degenerate friend's house. And our plan was to meet up downtown for the fireworks at midnight. So it was getting around like 11 o'clock, and I texted him and said, where are you? And he sent me back this really kind of incoherent short text that was like, not leaving. And I was like, okay, do you want me to come to the party? And he was like, I can't remember what he said, but it was something along the lines of, only if you want to. And I was like, what the hell? So I actually watched the fireworks with my boss and her family, which was lovely. And then I started to walk home, and on the way home was this degenerate guy's house. So I swung by to see my boyfriend, and he was completely shit-faced out of it. Like, his pupils were blown up to the size of frickin' dinner plates. And I could tell that there was something really off about him. I asked him, you know, did you do drugs with them? Because I knew that these people were really into drugs. And he said, he got really indignant. He's like, no, I don't do that. And I was like, okay, well, no judgment. You just look like you're out of your mind. And I'm not sure if he was lying to me, because he turned into quite the liar. But I kind of suspect that maybe those people like slipped him drugs or put something in his drink. I'm not sure, but he was really shitty with me, and he basically told me to just leave, that I should just go, because I was ruining the time for everybody. And so I did leave, but I left kind of knowing that something was probably going to happen if I left him there, and feeling really rejected, but also just kind of accepting it. And so I left, and I was walking home, and the moon was either full or really close to full. And I remember looking at her, and that was when my deep and meaningful relationship with the moon started. And I remember feeling support from the world around me and from the nature that I had started to spend more and more time with. And I was crying a little bit, and some nice Samoan guys, they stopped and asked me if I was okay, and like asked if they needed to walk me home. And I was like, how are these complete strangers nicer than my fucking boyfriend who lets me walk home at 1 a.m. So I went home and I went to bed, and I got up the next morning and I ate my 10 spotty bananas and relaxed and enjoyed the sunshine a little bit. Decided to go for a run on the trails around Wellington. And I figured on the way home from my run I would just swing by his house, because he lived with his dad, like a loser. Oh my god, I really disliked his dad. His dad was such a disrespectful prick. Quick interlude of a story. This guy, this is who this guy is. This is why I don't like people named Patrick. This guy was married, right? Has 3 kids with his wife, cheats on his wife. He leaves her. They're in the middle of getting a divorce. His wife is diagnosed with breast cancer while they're getting a divorce. They've come to an agreement, and he refused to sign it. And apparently, this is what my boyfriend told me, he went back and renegotiated the divorce agreement so that he would get part of her health insurance payout for her cancer. And I remember how much, when my boyfriend was with me, he would express how much he hated his dad and how much he thought his dad was a piece of shit for the way that he treated his mom, and how he hated the way that his dad behaved, and how it was bullshit how his dad talked to me, yet he wouldn't do anything about it. Yet he still lived in his house because he was too much of a freaking loser to get his own place. Anyway, rant's over. I went by his dad's house on the way back from my run, and I noticed that his motorcycle was uncovered. So I covered it, and I texted him and said, you know, the cover on your bike had blown across the street. I put it back. And I went down to see if he was there, and nobody was home. And I kind of knew for sure that my intuition was right about what had likely happened the night before. So I don't hear from him for, I think, the entire day that day. I went over to his place the day after, and he like arrives wearing someone else's clothes that I'd never seen before. And he started his lying about what he had done. First it was nothing happened, then it was something happened, then it was something really happened, then it was no, that didn't happen, I lied, it was something else. And it was so freaking convoluted, and he was lying so much, and I was so pissed off just because he wouldn't do me the service of telling me the goddamn truth. Like, again, grow a pair, own up to it. But he wouldn't. He just kept lying and lying and lying. And I mean, I still don't know what happened. I still don't know if I ever got a straight answer. Somehow I was like just desperate enough and had just a small enough sense of self-worth to agree to like talk about it with him. He invited me over for dinner a day or two later, and at this point I was pretty hardcore vegan. He had watched Earthlings with me and refused to have a feeling. And so I go over for dinner, and he has a dead whole baby pig, cutting it up. And the baby pig has like this giant hole in its skull where it had had its skull bashed in. And he was standing there saying, oh my god, this is so disgusting, I feel so sick, this is wrong. And I remember him saying, I understand why you're vegan now. And I was like, okay, my god, this guy, like, he's indicated that he does want to be with me, he's indicated that he's made a lot of mistakes, now he's indicating that he understands why I'm vegan. Like, could he be changing? Oh my goodness. And then, as it turns out, he had invited his degenerate friend and his unfortunate girlfriend over for dinner. And as soon as they showed up, his behavior did like a 180, and all of a sudden it was like, oh dude, this is so sick, you should see like this baby pig, oh, this is what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna cut it up like this, oh, we're gonna grill it, this is gonna be awesome, oh, meat, meat. I remember thinking, my god, what are you doing here? How can you think you're worth so little? And this is one of the few moments in our relationship that I'm like genuinely proud of. I just stood up, I grabbed my bag, and I walked out without so much as a word. And I went home and was sobbing, and I called my mom because I guess we were having a good phase, yeah? And she actually drove down and she stayed the night with me in Wellington. I called her and I said, Mom, you know, things have fallen apart with Will and I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know how I'm gonna function, because I literally didn't know how I was going to function. Like, would I go back to being alcoholic? Would I go back to self-harm? What would happen? I just didn't know how to deal with that level of emotion in a healthy way. And she came down, and I really appreciate that. And a few hours later, I guess after he was done entertaining with his friends, he showed up and I said, I don't ever want to speak to you again. I don't ever want to see you again. And I was honestly really relieved that it was finally over and that I had finally broken up with this person that I'd wanted to break up with for well over a year at this point. And I was pretty excited for what the future had in store for me. And over the next several months, I kind of started dating, but I was vegan, raw vegan, like couldn't find anyone in Wellington at that point who would fit the bill, so to speak. And at some point, my ex-boyfriend apologized. Just, you know, kept apologizing and saying he wanted to be a different person, and he was kind of acting like he wanted to be a different person and supposedly wasn't hanging out with this degenerate friend anymore. You know, I kind of had this fantasy in my head, like, oh, we'll just go through this rough patch, and what he really needs is like a breakup, and that'll change who he is, and he'll want to be a different person so that he can stay with me because he'll love me that much. Yeah, it's a long story, huh, Patoons? And so we kind of fell back into our relationship without it actually being a relationship, but I was still quite adamant that I was gonna leave New Zealand. I wanted to go to Hawaii. I had found the raw food community that I wanted to go live with, you know, you guys have heard that story time. And so I booked my ticket to Hawaii and I was gonna leave, and I did. And I was proud of myself for doing that, and I went on a great adventure that blew up in my face. And then I went to go visit my sister in North Carolina, trying to like patch that relationship together, and I was really confident that, you know, she was really coming into her own, and we would be able to have this amazing relationship, and maybe I would be able to have the family that I always wanted because I was mature and I was like capable of communicating, and that's all that it would take, and they would just, you know, everyone would get along if I could just manage myself as best as possible. And it didn't go well. At some point when I was in North Carolina, I had been emailing with the ex-boyfriend, and he was telling me everything I wanted to hear, you know. I was telling him about what I was getting into. This was when I was living with the psychic lady and I started having all the alien dreams and stuff, and I was telling him about that, and he was like, wow, that's really interesting. I would be really interested in learning about tarot cards, and oh wow, that's so intriguing. Oh, spirits, great, woo, yeah. And he honestly sounded pretty freaking enthusiastic with what I was getting into, and I was like, okay, well cool, you know where I'm at. Like, I'm being really open about who I am and what I'm into, and you seem to be interested. And he asked me several times, can I come visit? And I said no, and then finally I said, yeah, okay, come. And things with my sister started going really poorly around that time, and he showed up, and I was happy to see him because I thought that we would have this like great love story of bad mistakes and redemption, but no. I remember sitting out on the front porch of my sister's house and hearing very distinctly a voice in my ear that said, he's been having sex with her again. The girl that he had, you know, cheated on me with previously. And I remember being so taken aback by hearing this voice. It's like similar to when I met Levi, hearing this voice and being very surprised by it. And I turned to him and I was like, you've been having sex with her, haven't you? And he, you know, all of the blood drained out of his face. He's like, oh, what? No, I would never. And I was like, yes, you have. And then again, he started lying and backpedaling and telling me a different story. And, you know, I had the timeline in my head pretty thoroughly, and I kept catching him in his lies and his contradictions, and he couldn't keep track of them. And I kept pressing him for the truth, and he wouldn't tell me the truth. So finally I said, all right, well, clearly you're a liar and you're a cheater, and you've been misrepresenting yourself to me, and I don't want to be with that person. So, you know, you have 36 hours to get out of this house, and I don't want to see you again. And it still blows me away to this day, because I went out to dinner with my sister and some of our friends, mostly my sister's friends, who had kind of become mutual friends. You know, like spiritually evolved open women who were like all for our empowerment, and they were like, oh, this is really sad, you're being really mean to him. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. He's now cheated on me at least twice that I can confirm. He's lying his butt off, and you guys are saying that I'm being mean to him? But, you know, their words got into my head, and I started second guessing myself. You know, maybe I am being mean. I didn't have good boundaries at that point. I didn't have a good understanding of myself. I didn't have a good amount of self-worth to fall back on, and I really second guessed myself. And then things started getting really bad with my sister, and I realized that I was gonna have to leave her place kind of like as soon as possible. And then that was when I realized that he had gotten me pregnant. And I still think that he did it purposely, because I had given him fair warning, and he did not heed my warnings, and I did not stand up for myself, and I felt so desperate and so confused and so by myself. You know, I even remember I would ask him, like, dear God, what do you think we should do? Like, I need an opinion from you. And he would just say, whatever you want to do, it's fine. I was like, okay, well, clearly I can't raise a child with you because you can't form an opinion. And so I did not have that child, and that was a choice that I am thankful for every single day of my life. That was one of the best choices I have ever made. It was hard. It was really emotionally difficult. It took processing, lots of processing, which I didn't want to do at first, but after the whole thing was processed and after my body had come off of the hormone roller coaster, I am so thankful that I made the choice that I did, and I'm so thankful that I had the ability to make that choice for myself. I cannot count my blessings enough. But to be perfectly honest, the whole experience threw me for a loop, and you know, I should have known to take better care of myself, but I always thought of myself as like a bionic woman who, you know, didn't have needs like regular people. And, you know, it was a week after this had happened, and I had just, you know, been bleeding like crazy. We were like, let's go on a bike tour, and we leave on a frickin' bike tour with the expectation that we're going to ride down the coast of California. And I got my bike outfitted so that I could have packs on the back, and he didn't want to. And my backpack was bigger, and he didn't want to get a bigger backpack. So we ended up going on this like horrid bike tour with me carrying most of the stuff and suffering from blood loss, and I just couldn't keep up with him. And I kept asking, and like I would break down into tears and be like, please, just slow down. I can't do this. We're on these narrow roads going over mountain passes, and I cannot keep up with you. And like, I'm feeling so abandoned right now. Please, dear God, slow down. And it was just, oh, it's just ridiculous. Why are you being ridiculous? Oh, fine. And then he doesn't do it. And that was so what our relationship was like, was me just like begging, why do you have to be a butthead? And him denying that he's doing it and then not changing his behavior. So anyway, I was falling apart, emotionally speaking. I had no idea what else to do. So I went back with him to New Zealand. And I was estranged from my mom again at this point because she and my sister had been such malicious, horrid human beings. And my ex-boyfriend, he's still my ex-boyfriend, and I ended up getting a job at a hotel. It is the place where I told the story of the worst coworkers ever, if you want to watch that story time. And it was like as soon as we got to this place, which was a small boutique hotel in Kaikoura, New Zealand, as soon as we got there, It was like a switch flipped in my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. I don't even know what to call him. Live-in ex-boyfriend. My live-in ex-boyfriend. It's like a switch flipped. He went from being a person that, you know, I could coerce into talking to me about issues to a person who, if I brought something up, he would say, oh, just deal with your own crazy. You're so out of it. Like, I can't even deal with your bullshit anymore. I remember, I don't know if he did it on purpose or what, but he would set me up to, you know, to look really angry and crazy in front of other people, where, you know, I would walk in, I would be in a good mood and I'd be like, hey babe, you know, what do you want me to do with XYZ? And he would be like, whatever, I don't even care. And I would just be like, oh, fuck you then. And it's like always as soon as I said that, someone else would walk in and they'd be like, whoa, what's Lily's problem? It's like, he's my problem. We would be working together. I would be working as a server. He as a chef. I would walk in a good mood and I'd be like, order up, you know, and then I would tell him the order and then he'd come back and he's like, you know, you don't have to say that every time, and just snap at me. But I was in such an emotionally disintegrated place that it's, you know, that would make me cry and I would be, you know, why do you have to be so mean to me? And then I would go and I would have to compose myself, usually standing in the freezer. And then, you know, of course he would come in and be like, what's your problem now? You know what, you should just go, I'll clean up everything. As if, you know, then he's coming to my rescue. And just the frickin' crazy making was insane. I honestly questioned when we got there, has he become possessed by a demon? And then, of course, as you guys know from my previous story time, all of those other people who worked there, most of them, a few were nice. Most of them were just like degenerates as well. And of course, because he was around them, he became them because he didn't have a personality of his own. And he just started turning more and more into a dick. And I started feeling like, you have no right to talk to me this way. And I would say that to him. And, you know, there were times when I definitely did escalate things, which it's not the way that I operate now. I'm more aware of communication and escalation and behavior, but, you know, it's like I would call him names, or I would be like, oh, you want to be that kind of man that talks to me that way? And that would really trigger him, I came to learn. And it went from us having verbal arguments and him just being mean to me to him getting mad and, like, pushing me when I was walking up the stairs. I remember he pushed me down one time and then came and tried to, like, climb on top of me, and I kicked him off, and then I stood up and he pushed me down again. And then there would always be the apology, the, oh, I don't want to be this person, I'm disgusted by my behavior. And then the next time we had a fight, which was a few days later, it wasn't long, I remember he grabbed my arm and flung me up against the wall and then pushed me down on the stairs, and then he was on top of me, and I remember he put his hand around my neck so gently, just like really gently, and I was so taken aback and confused. And then it's like he came to and realized what he was doing and, you know, stood up and left, I don't know, to go hang out and drop ecstasy with his degenerate friends. And again, I was like, okay, well, I'm a bionic woman and red flags don't apply to me and I can handle this because I'm capable and competent and strong. And then it wasn't but maybe a week or 2 weeks from the first time that he physically touched me and pushed me down that I picked up his phone and I looked at his phone because I suspected that he was being unfaithful again. And I looked at his phone and he had someone whose contact name was C, you know. And there were texts back and forth that was like, oh yeah, you should come back to Wellington for my 21st. I'll make it worth your while, blah blah blah. And again, I became very determined. I'm not putting myself through this anymore. I don't deserve this shit. This is bullshit. I really didn't want to quit my job. I really didn't. I wanted the money. I wanted to fill my contract. I loved it there. Like, I loved this place. Kaikoura is so gorgeous, and I was so lucky and blessed and grateful to be living there and to have a good job that paid really well. And I really didn't want to leave my job, but I decided that it was the only option I had. And so he got off work and he came into our apartment where we were living, and he started, like, belligerently asking me what my problem was. And I was on my computer and he was like, oh, you're always clicking away on your computer. Can't be present in real life. And I was like, you know, there's nothing to be present for that's worth it. But I just ignored him. And then he walked over and he slammed my computer shut. You know, I pulled my hands back. He slams it shut, And I was like, you know what? I'm leaving. I'm not doing this anymore. Oh, you think you're leaving? Fine, go. I don't care. Then he got more and more mad. Like, what? You won't even talk to me? You won't even talk to me about it? So like you. And we just started having another ridiculous fight. I asked him, I was like, I think it's the least you can do for me after the last year to leave tonight and to just give me tonight alone in this apartment that I love, that I don't want to leave. Can you just do that for me? I want to sleep by myself. And he said no, he refused. It came time to go to bed and he came upstairs to go to sleep, and I said, no, you're not sleeping in here with me. Like, you either need to go and sleep at the degenerate couple's house, or you need to go sleep on the couch. You're not sleeping here with me. And he very obstinately got into the bed, and I said, I don't think you're understanding. Like, I'm physically not sleeping next to you, and I will be damned if I don't sleep in my bed. And, you know, he told me to shut up or something and rolled over. I was pretty irate. And I stood up on the bed, and I stood over him, and I said, get the fuck out. I might have yelled it. And again, this was one of those moments where I escalated it. And this was an opportunity where I could have left, swallowed my pride, and taken good care of myself instead of trying to get the upper hand over him. And I was standing there and I was saying, get the fuck out. And I remember he looked at me with this like look that I've never seen another person have before. And he grabbed me by my shirt and my shirt and my bra, and he pulled me down so hard that my shirt ripped. And I wasn't expecting it, and I fell. And I fell down onto the bed in such a way where my head was up against the wall and my shoulders were on the bed. And then he grabbed my neck and he pushed down really hard. And I was like kinked to the side and he was pushing down and I couldn't breathe. And I kicked him off and I screamed at him again, get out. And he came back at me and he grabbed my neck again. And then that time he grabbed my nose and closed my nose holes so that I definitely couldn't breathe. And he held me there for I'm not sure how long, but I was kind of struggling and trying to force him off of me, and then eventually managed to get my legs beneath him and then pushed as hard as I could, and he kind of fell backwards. And then I stood up as fast as I could and I said, get out, like, get out, just get out, get out. And that's all I kept saying. And, you know, I said, get out or I'm gonna call the police. And he like walked around and like, you know, grabbed his jacket and his keys and he was dragging ass. And he said to me, you're just mad because I won't fuck you. That's all you want is to get fucked. And I just said, get out. Again, just get out or I'm calling the police. And then he backed me into a corner in the closet and said really clearly, you got what you deserved. And he had always been such a sweet guy. I was just blown away. I never thought that he would have been capable of those words or his actions. I was really confused, traumatized at this point. I was hopped up on adrenaline for sure. I went downstairs, I grabbed the phone and I said, get out or I'm calling the police. And he left. I went to call my mom because we had been speaking again, back and forth as always. As I was dialing, suddenly the phone went dead because he ripped the phone out of the wall outside of our apartment. And at that point, I just remember this feeling of terror coming over me. I'm alone with him, and I don't know what he's gonna do. He's already completely shocked me with his behavior. I don't know what he's capable of anymore. And so I ran as fast as I could upstairs to get my cell phone, and I only got a signal with my cell phone in, you know, one little corner of the room, like holding the phone outside the window trying to catch a signal. And I called my mom from that little corner and told her like, oh my god, he just attacked me, I don't know what to do. And she said, call the police. And I said, no, I'm not gonna call the police, I don't want to ruin his life. You know, he made one little mistake, I don't want to ruin his life over it. And I refused to call the cops. And while I was standing up there, I heard some crashing downstairs and realized that he had somehow gotten through a locked window. I don't even know how he did it. Crawled in through a frickin' window and he was downstairs again. And I was absolutely terrified. Like, I've never felt terror like that in my life before. And, you know, my mom's on the phone screaming, like, I don't know what to do. I'm gonna call the police. And I was like, no, don't call the police. Don't you dare fucking call the police. I don't want to ruin his life. And he screamed up and he was like, I'm just getting my effing keys, even though he already had his keys. But then I heard him leave again and I went downstairs and I locked the door, and I pulled all the curtains and locked all the windows, and I pushed the frickin' couch up against the door so that he couldn't get in that way, and I stayed awake for the next 2 days. Right after all that had happened, my mom said, you know, you get yourself over and with other people. So I called my coworkers, as I told in my other story, and they came and picked me up, and then tried to coerce me into having a frickin' threesome with them that night when I was like sobbing and my frickin' clothes are ripped off. And told them what happened, and they're like, oh god, that's horrible. And then went in the next morning and told the owners of the place, my bosses, that I can't work with him anymore, you know. He attacked me, I'm not safe with him anymore. And when I told them, I was just like dumbfounded by how calm they were about it. They're like, yeah, okay, yeah, your choice, whatever. If that's what you gotta do, that's what you gotta do. And I was like, you're not worried that he attacked me? Oh, you know, things happen. Well, I'm gonna need to know that he's not going to be coming into the apartment where I am while I'm packing my things. Well, you know, I mean, it's his place too. I can't do anything about that. And I was like, no, you need to. And then for all of that day, my ex was coming and going whenever he really wanted to, and I was having panic attack after panic attack, and I couldn't get myself under control. It's like my body was in survival mode, you know, it was just trying to keep me safe. And just having really visceral reactions to seeing him and him being in my presence and him being in the apartment alone with me. And I went to them several times and I said, you can't keep letting him come in here. And they're like, oh, you know, he just needs to go for a surf. He just needs to go for a surf and clear his head. You know, this is just what happens. You have fights and sometimes you do things you never thought you would do. You are all crazy. You know, I need a lock on my door. I need something. And so I realized that they weren't going to take it seriously. So I think it was the second night that I couldn't sleep. My mom was trying to get ferry tickets down to come pick me up. Bless her heart. The second night, I wrote up a timeline of everything that had happened and the management's actions. And at this point, as the adrenaline started to wear off, my neck and my back and my shoulders were just in excruciating pain. Like, I couldn't really stand up straight. I couldn't turn my neck easily. I was starting to get kind of worried that some damage had been done. The pain was pretty freaking unbearable, and I wanted to go to the hospital. I wanted to be checked out. I was just terrified, hadn't slept in days. And so I threatened the management. I was like, you know, I'm going to bring a freaking lawsuit against you if you don't put locks on my doors or keep him away from me or something. And they're like, oh, whatever. When are you leaving? Like, when are you out? We need to know when the apartment will be vacated. At this point, my mom and some friends had convinced me to call a domestic abuse hotline. I had some friends from yoga teacher training who had worked for domestic abuse hotlines, and I had talked to them, and they'd be like, you know, I called the domestic abuse hotline in New Zealand, and they were like, you know, you experienced a very serious assault. And just to have that validated, because it hadn't been validated by anyone at this place where I was working with him, and they said, you need to call the police. You know, you're not safe. You need to call the police. There's a chance that he will come and try to retaliate against you for speaking up and for telling your boss what happened. And, you know, even if that's like a 1% chance that he could come and seriously hurt you, you need to protect yourself. You're worth protecting. And so it was several people in my life who finally got me seeing straight and convinced me to call the police. And I was so terrified. I needed somebody to protect me in a way that I couldn't clearly protect myself at that moment. And no one else would do that. It was ridiculous. And so I called the police, and I think the nicest police officer I've ever met came out. Again, like, he was just so nice to me, and he didn't have to be, but he was really nice. And really protective and, like, you know, made sure that I was safe. He took me to get checked out by the local doctor, which was nicknamed Dr. Death. I don't think he did a very good job, but, you know, he took my statement, made sure I was safe, and then he went and arrested my ex-boyfriend. And it was like just knowing where my ex was I fell asleep and I was able to rest. And then that was the day that my mom showed up too, and we packed up all of my stuff, and that was the last time I ever saw or spoke to or had any contact with my crappiest boyfriend ever. And then I went and lived with my mom for a while, which was also not very nice. And I remember having all of the feelings of missing him right after everything happened, right after he had strangled me. I remember thinking, I could just go to sleep right now and I would wake up in the morning and it would be like none of this ever happened. But I also remember making the choice to call someone and tell someone so that I couldn't pretend that it wasn't happening anymore. And honestly, I don't think that if the police hadn't been involved, I would have had the guts to stay away from him. And so I'm really thankful that the police did end up getting involved. My ex or his dad or our boss, I'm not sure who, got a very expensive defense lawyer and probably ended up blowing like $10,000 to $20,000 was the prosecutor's estimate of how much the defense costed. And they got continuance after continuance and really dragged it out. And by the time there was actually a trial date set, I was on the other side of the world and I was trying to heal. You know, it was 2 years later by the time this thing ever went to trial, and I was on my way back to Hawaii, and I wanted it to be behind me so badly. And I already knew that they were lying about me, that they were saying that when the assault happened, I was super drunk and belligerent, and I had been really abusive to him for months before, and I was unstable, which was, I mean, to be fair, I was kind of emotionally unstable, but I was also holding it together. But regardless, I knew that he was going to drag me through the dirt to try to save his own ass. And I didn't want to do it, you know? It's like their defense lawyer tactics worked. And I had been told by the police when I filed charges that I would never have to testify. But I guess, I don't know, when push came to shove, so to speak, without my testimony, my in-person testimony, they had no choice but to drop the charges. And I left New Zealand. I needed to get out of there. There wasn't really anything for me there, and so I left, and I ended up living in Port Townsend, Washington, which is right outside of Seattle. And after I'd been living there for several months, I got the strangest call from a friend that I had from New Zealand, and she was from San Francisco. So she was back in San Francisco working at this tea shop. And my ex-boyfriend and I had actually visited her in San Francisco the year before. And she called me and she said that your ex-boyfriend just walked into my tea shop. He's in San Francisco. And he asked me to go have coffee with him. And I started freaking out because the police had told me that they had taken his passport and that he wasn't allowed to travel. So part of what felt so nice and warm and snuggly about being back in the United States was that, you know, he couldn't get there. And I really lost it. It was just that feeling of terror came up again all of a sudden. You know, it's like he's in San Francisco. That's a 1 or 2 hour flight from where I am, or he could jump on a train or do God only knows what. So I was freaking out, trying to figure out what was going on, trying to figure out why he still had his passport. And now that I have long gone through all of the feelings of missing him and not knowing what to do with myself outside of a relationship, I can reflect on all of those moments where I knew I didn't want to be with him, and I wish I had just ripped the Band-Aid off and gotten it over with and gone no contact or something. All of those moments when I did kind of stand up for myself, but I didn't really follow through with it, and I so regret all of the time that I spent with this guy. It was almost 4 years of my life, and he just took so much from me, and I kept letting him, and I couldn't see how unhealthy it was. I didn't know that I would be okay alone, but as it turns out, being alone is like the best. You get to do whatever you want all the time. So if you're in a relationship right now that you know isn't working, get out of it. Stop wasting your life like, they're not going to change. They're not going to change. They might lie to you about changing, but unless y'all are in like intensive therapy and you're working on learning how to communicate with each other and treating each other well, and unless they agree to like really proactively work with you to drastically change the relationship that you're in, just get out. I wish I had just gotten out. I could have had so many more awesome experiences just by myself, just with my life, if I had not been so scared. But, you know, it's in the past, and I love my life now. You know, realistically, I wouldn't change anything, and I'd like to think that I would have gotten to this place anyway, even if I had left that butthead when I knew I wanted to. Like, if I could go back and just walk out of that airport, if I could walk out of San Francisco International Airport without him, oh my God, that would have felt so good. And then I could have just avoided all of the other shit. And I probably could have gone and made poor choices with somebody else, but nonetheless, I wish I'd been brave enough to do that. I wish I had been brave enough to put myself first. I wish I had been able to take good care of myself enough to have trusted myself that would continue. I wish that I had had enough of a sense of my own worthiness that I could have trusted that I would have been okay without him. Because I was okay without him. I was great without him. I freaking blossomed without him. And I'm beyond thankful that I am without him, and that I've been without him for coming on like 7 years now. You know, I do feel like this experience taught me so much, and I hope that through this experience I'm able to convey the lessons that I learned from this, and my hope is that someone can learn from that and perhaps believe enough in themselves that they're gonna be okay by themselves if they're in a relationship that's just not right. Don't be there. Take care of yourself. Put yourself first. Give yourself the love that you need, and understand that, like, yes, there are times of loneliness when you're alone, you know, there are times when you want to be held at night, but, you know, you also get to sleep by yourself and take up the whole bed and use as many blankets as you want, and you don't have to have the fan on if you don't want to. And from what I've learned is that, you know, once you're with somebody a while, you stop cuddling at night anyway, so it's really just having an extra body in the bed. But anyway, thank you for sticking in for this whole entire story. Okay guys, so that is the story of my worst relationship ever. The things that I regret about it, the things I wish I could change, the red flags and warning signs that I didn't pay attention to, the way that I participated and escalated things when I could have swallowed my pride and taken good care of myself and kept myself more safe. You know, but the interesting thing that I feel like nobody asks, they're always like, well, why didn't you leave? If he was abusive, why didn't you leave? And they're not like, hey, dude, if you had a disagreement with her, why did you have to strangle her? Wasn't there something else you could have done? But no, we treat these guys like they're freaking wild animals that can't control themselves. And yet, I'm supposed to have the freaking presence of mind to predict that he's about to strangle me and so get myself out. And I hope, I don't know, maybe you've been entertained or gleaned some wisdom or something. Whatever. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And as always, make better choices for yourselves. No one will do this for you. And take really, really good care. I will see you all so very soon. Bye. The worst relationship ever. Been working on that. Chill out. My life revolves around this chihuahua. Are you alright, my queen? You can lay back down and get comfortable again.